Yes.
Okay.
Ma'am.
So biodiversity is the diversity of life forms which are present on the planet Earth, be it animal, be it plants or microorganisms. Diversity of life form. Moving on further, so we were discussing the occurrence of genetic diversity. How do we have the different forms of individual, and how does variation exists within different populations? So be it populations of humans, be it populations of plants. So I can show you one picture. You can see the genetic diversity. Can you see?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
how does
Yes, ma'am.
this genetic diversity occurs? What is the basis for it? So we have variation in the gene expression, and then we have variation in the gene sequence. So variation in the gene expression can also be because of the variation in the gene sequence, or the variation in expression can also be due to adaptations to different environmental conditions. We all know that DNA makes up our genetic material, and the nucleotide sequences it has, that is ATGC, are making up the genes. So short nucleotide sequences, short segments of DNA, they make up the genes. Now in an individual, we have two copies of a single gene, and we discussed in the last class why does this happen. So do you remember? One set of genes we have from each of the parents. So one set of genes from mother, one set of genes from father. So we have two forms of a single gene, be it hair color, eye color, height, everything is governed by the expression of the genes. Okay, sometimes the dominant character is expressed, and sometimes the absence of this dominant character leads to the expression of the recessive trait. You understand this much?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it clear to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
ma'am.
Now we will discuss some phenomena which leads to this genetic variation. So that is why the genetic diversity exists, due to genetic variation. Now how does genetic variation occurs? So it is broadly categorized into two types. One is the genetic recombination, and the other is the spontaneous mutations in the DNA. Coming to the spontaneous mutations in the DNA first. So what do you understand by mutations? These are changes in the nucleotide sequence of
Yes,
the
yes,
DNA.
yes.
Clear? Changes in the nucleotide sequence of the DNA. So that change can also fall in the nucleotide sequence of the gene. So due to this change in the nucleotide sequence, even if it is of one base pair, it can affect the expression of the gene. या तो वो जीन का एक्सप्रेशन स्टार्ट कर देगा या फिर वो जीन को साइलेंस कर देगा, ना जीन का एक्सप्रेशन नहीं होगा. So that is why mutations are important. So mutations can also drive a gene, and it can also silence a gene. So mutation in the DNA will actually cause a variation in the gene expression. And this variation in the gene expression will lead to the differences, or will lead to the different forms of individuals of a species, or in a population. How does this mutations occur in the DNA? You have any
Could be because
idea?
of physical factors like radiations and all.
Because of?
Physical factors like radiations and all that come in
Yes.
contact.
So the environment we are exposed to makes us vulnerable to mutations in the DNA, and mutations always occur in the DNA. But when it becomes hereditary, like when it changes the expression of the gene, and when it becomes hereditary, then the mutations are concerning. Mutations that lead to diseases in individuals, those kind of mutations are deleterious. So that should be avoided. So cancer, occurrence of cancer is majorly due to mutations in the oncogene. So what happens in cancer is your cell keeps on dividing. Normally क्या होता है, body में बहुत सारे cells होते हैं, and these cells, they divide, they grow, they perform their function, and eventually they die. But in cancer what happens is the cells, they evade apoptosis, so they evade cell death. तो क्या होता है, बॉडी में सेल का नंबर बहुत ज्यादा इंक्रीज हो जाता है, जिसकी वजह से ट्यूमर्स फॉर्म होते हैं, एंड इट कीप्स ऑन spreading. So how does this number of cell increases? So it increases because the cell is evading death mechanism. अब वो death mechanisms कैसे evade कर रहा है? Because there is a mutation in the genes which control cell death. Okay, so these mutations have led or have given the cells the power to sustain, to overcome death, and then it leads to cancer. And one more point you have to remember here is that कि single mutation होने से कुछ नहीं होता. To get a disease like cancer, you have to contain a lot of mutations, particularly in the proto-oncogenes, जो oncogenes हमारी body में already present होती हैं. So this was about mutation. So it is basically change in the expression of the DNA sequence, change in the expression of which is leading to changes in the expression of the gene. So it is basically because of change in the DNA nucleotide sequence, which is leading to changes in gene expression. So this is one part of it. Coming to the second one is genetic recombination. So genetic recombination occurs due to sexual reproduction and meiosis. So in sexual reproduction, two partners exchange their gametes, the male and the female. So there is a fusion of the male and female gametes, and a zygote is formed. So which has one set of genes from both the parents. So obviously this will lead to variation. Will it or will it not?
Yes, ma'am.
So you have two copies of one gene. अब उसमें से जो डोमिनेंट है वो एक्सप्रेस करेगी, या फिर जो डोमिनेंट है वो है ही नहीं तो रिसेसिव एक्सप्रेस करेगी. Again, this will lead to change in the expression of the genes, and thus we have the variation. Now coming to another important phenomena which leads to genetic recombination, that is meiosis. So mitosis जो होता है, mitosis and meiosis दो तरह के divisions होते हैं in our body, and mitosis is a kind of division which ensures the division of the somatic cells. Somatic cells are normal body cells. But meiosis is a kind of division which occurs only in the gametes. Gametic cells में होती है. So human chromosome number is 46 and it has 23 pairs of chromosomes. So what happens during meiosis? So meiosis is also a reductional division. So during meiosis, what will happen? The chromosomes will exchange the segment of arms. Can you see that these chromosomes have paired up and they have exchanged the segment? ये clear है सबको? So when they have exchanged this segment, obviously they have exchanged the genes. Okay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So when they have exchanged the genes, that means there would be a variation in the position of the gene. And when there will be a variation in the position of the gene, it will definitely affect the expression of the gene. And when the expression of the gene will be affected, there will be genetic diversity. You understood the point here?
Yes. Yes.
सबको समझ में आ गया ना?
Yes, ma'am.
जी मैम.
Okay. So mutations in the DNA and genetic recombination leads to genetic diversity. So that is why no two individuals of a population are ever identical. जब तक वो identical twins नहीं है, तब तक they will never ever be identical. So there will always be a slight difference. And why does this genetic variation occurs? Now we have understood that genetic variation exists, but what is the basis for this genetic, not the basis, what is the benefit of this genetic variation?
It's in adapting the changing environment.
Yes. So it gives you
It
fitness,
was
it
the
gives you
hierarchy diseases.
advantage, so that you can adapt to the changing environmental conditions. So that is why genetic diversity is important. So it is giving you evolutionary significance. So when you are adapting to certain environments, you are getting some traits, you are developing superiority, and you are evolving. इसीलिए over the years we can see there are changes in the human races. So अगर हम कुछ साल पुराने humans को compare करें और अभी वाले humans को compare करें, obviously they have evolved much. And how they have evolved according to the environmental conditions present at that given time. Okay.
और मैम ये जेनेटिक डिजीज के पास ऑन में एक हिंड्रेंस की तरह एक्ट करती है, फॉर एग्जांपल डायबिटिक्स में.
You can say that suppose diabetes किसी gene की वजह से हो रहा था and expression of that gene has changed, and when it has got carried on in generations, so it may lead to loss of expression of that gene. So there is a change in expression of gene which may be which can also be in a disease causing gene. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what are the benefits of genetic diversity? So it will ensure food security. How? Because superior variety plants will evolve. Those plants will have resistance to environmental stresses like high temperature or maybe low temperature or saline conditions, or they will require less water, or these plants may be resistant to pests. So the pests which actually destroy the plant species. So more of genetic diversity, with more of genetic diversity, we can always improve the food security. Okay. And if the gene pool is rich, we can identify good traits. हम लोग identify कर सकते हैं कौन सा gene हमारे supposedly wheat plant की yield को बढ़ाएगा, मतलब उसका grain ज़्यादा produce होगा. So we can always take out that gene and we can always integrate it and we can raise up transgenic plants. So that is another benefit of genetic diversity. So जब gene pool ज़्यादा होगा, so there are chances that we will have superior traits with us. Now it does give us climate stability. How? Genetic diversity also gives us climatic stability. How is it possible? So since we are evolving, we'll be able to survive in different environmental conditions. And when we are surviving in different environmental conditions, so this may also enhance our ability to help the ecosystems to maintain a balance. So you can take the example here that rapid evolution of marine phytoplankton actually increases the ocean's carbon uptake. So here a phytoplankton, which is an aquatic plant, is evolving. So that evolution or that change in the gene expression is making it able to increase the ocean's carbon uptake. So it is again helping to regulate the climate change. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
And it is also providing us with good ecosystem services. So हमें medicinal plants, अगर medicinal plants का genetic diversity बढ़ेगा, तो obviously we will have an advantage and we can always take we can always harness that diversity, and also it will provide us with more better ecosystem services. Now coming to the species diversity. This was with the genetic diversity. Now coming to species diversity. What do you understand by the term species diversity? What is a species first?
Similar or I think comparable individuals are present in a species or form species.
So which can interbreed amongst themselves.
Yes, ma'am.
Those are species. What do you understand by species diversity then? Variety of species which are present in a community or maybe in an ecosystem. So species diversity is defined by two parameters. So these are number of species and abundance of each species that live in a particular location. What do you understand by the term number of species? How many species are present in an area? That is known as number of species. जैसे एक प्लांट के कितने स्पीशीज प्रेजेंट हैं? So it is a sunflower or it is a tomato. How many plant species are present? So that is species, number of species, which is also known as species richness or species variety. Second parameter is the abundance of species. What do you understand by the term abundance? How many individuals of that species are present? Supposedly agar species की variety है 5, so we have tomato, we have potato, we have brinjal, we have sunflower and we have corn. So supposedly 5 species variety are present. Now out of this, if corn has 10 individuals and all the others have 2 individuals, then relative abundance of corn would be more. So corn would be the abundant species. Understand?
Yes, ma'am.
So if you were to measure the species richness of a forest, so I think you might find 20 bird species, 50 plant species and 10 mammal species. So this is the species richness जो different species present है. 20 bird species, 50 plant species and 10 mammal species. So this denotes the species richness. But abundance is the number of individual of each species. Okay. So there might be 100 mountain rats that live in a forest. So out of other species, this species has more individuals. So that is why its abundance is more. Got this point?
Yes, ma'am.
And when almost all the species are in you say almost all the species are in equal abundance, more or less equal abundance, then we can say that there is species evenness in the community. So we have two parameters, species richness and its abundance. And when the species abundance is similar in all the species, then we can say the community has species evenness. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So you are understanding this point, species evenness?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is an example. So here you can see that abundance of sunflower is more in the community too. This example was just included to tell you about abundance. Compared to all the other species, this is flourishing more. So this is relatively more abundant in the community too. Whereas in community 1, there is species evenness. You can see almost all individuals of a species are present in same numbers. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So there are, how do you calculate this species diversity? So there are indexes available for it through which you can calculate the species diversity, and we will discuss those indexes in the coming slides. So I will also tell you about species richness and abundance here. So you can see we have 3 tree species. We have sugar maple, we have beech, we have yellow birch. So you can see in the first sample, the species is even, whereas in the second sample, the species is not that even. So out of these two, which will you consider more diverse?
Sample 1.
The first one, because here the species are spread
Evenly distributed.
evenly. So if they are equally distributed, that means of flourishment of each of these species. But यहाँ पे number decrease हो रहा है. So this might also lead to the wipe out of any one of the species. So that's why we will not consider this sample as a, so these things you have to keep in mind when you are measuring the species diversity. So we have certain indexes through which we calculate species richness and species abundance. So for species richness, we have Margalef's index, and obviously एक community में या एक ecosystem में ऐसा नहीं होता इस एग्जाम्पल की तरह कि species are this much less. So it is in thousands and millions. So you have to have mathematical expression to calculate species richness and species abundance. So for species richness, we have Margalef's index. So species richness से हमें क्या पता चलेगा? What we basically understand by species richness?
Diversity at that particular place.
Yeah. So how many species are present in that particular area? So वो तो हमें Margalef's index से पता चल जाएगा. Now if we want to understand the abundance, then we have other two indexes. So we have Shannon-Wiener index and we have Simpson index. So these are mostly utilized to tell about the abundance of species in an area. So since they are indexes, so they have ranges. We have, this is ranging from 0 to 1. So in Shannon-Wiener index, the higher the value of the index, so it indicates a higher species diversity, whereas when the value of index is low, there will be low species diversity. So it is directly proportional. The value of index is directly proportional to the diversity of the species. Now, do you see lower dominance also? There is one term. So when the index is high, the value of the index is high, there are higher species diversity, there is higher species diversity, and there is lower dominance. What do you understand by the term lower dominance?
I think evenly
So that
distributed.
species is not abundance. So ये इसमें ये वाला सिनेरियो हो जाएगा. So this will not be here. मतलब कोई एक species उतना ज़्यादा abundant नहीं होगी. That is why it is known as lower dominance. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Coming to the other index,
Yes.
which is the Simpson's index. So it is based on the probability of finding two individuals belonging to the same species. So again, it is focusing on species abundance. So it is just based upon random sampling. But here you have to remember that it is also again a scale, but here there is opposite. So the values of the scale are not directly proportional to the species diversity. So the lower value would exhibit what?
High genetic, high diversity.
Yes. And the higher value would not exhibit species diversity.
Yes.
Okay. Now
Yes.
coming to the types of diversity which we have, which are on species scale. The first one is the alpha diversity. What do you understand by alpha diversity? Going back again to this picture. This is a community. The diversity present in a single community is known as alpha diversity. When we talk about beta diversity, we are comparing the species diversity between the two communities. And when we talk about the gamma diversity, it is the diversity of the entire landscape, entire area. So, according to the area, gamma diversity encompasses the maximum area, whereas alpha diversity is restricted to small areas only. Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Now coming to ecosystem diversity. So as the name suggests, ecosystem diversity is the diversity which is present within an ecosystem, the variation which is existing in an ecosystem. So this can be enumerated on enormous scales. So there can be variety of niches, there can be variety in trophic levels, there can be variety amongst the interactions between the organisms. So whether the organisms are staying in mutualism, or they are parasitic over each other, or the relationship is predatory. So all these are calculated in the ecosystem diversity. And ecosystem diversity, like all the other diversities, is important because it is ensuring that ecosystems are maintaining a homeostasis. So they are sustaining. So they are maintaining a balance between the abiotic and the biotic interactions. Okay. So not only this, it is also about variations in the terms of variety of ecosystems which are found within larger geographical regions. So it is also depending upon the geography. कुछ वेरिएशन टेरेन की वजह से भी आता है, कुछ लैंडस्केप्स की वजह से आता है. So the diversity would be different, the biodiversity would be different in the rivers if we compare it to the if we compare it with the forest. So there will always be a difference, and the biodiversity of lake is different from the biodiversity of the desert or maybe the ocean. So depending upon the geographical conditions also, there is a diversity in the ecosystem. So if we are talking about geographical conditions, then we also incorporate the climatic factors. So we have temperature, we have to take into account temperature also, and we have to take into account the altitude, the variation in the altitudes also. So you understand the three diversities. One is the genetic diversity, second the species diversity, and the ecosystem diversity. So are you also understanding the level of each diversity? So which diversity is at micro levels and which diversity is at macro levels?
Genetic one is the micro level.
Yes. So genetic diversity is changing the expression in the genes. That change in the expression in the gene is actually changing the diversity of the species. It may also affect the number of species. So the genetic diversity is affecting the species richness as well as the species abundance. Now, when there will be changes in species richness and species abundance, then it will obviously change the ecosystem diversity. So can you see that there is a thread of continuity between all these three diversities? So one is dependent on the other. And it can also be vice versa. If the ecosystem diversity changes, then obviously there may be effects in the genetic diversity. So we cannot say that it is always unidirectional, but vice versa is also true. Suppose there is a forest fire or there is any climatic change. So in that, the species will adapt or the species will not be able to survive. So when it is adapting, it again changes in the genetic diversity are occurring. And due to these changes in the genetic diversity, the species richness and abundance will be affected. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
You understand all these three? Genetic diversity and species diversity and ecosystem diversity. किसी को कुछ डाउट है तो प्लीज पूछ लो. Okay. So now coming to the next part of this unit, which pertains to biogeography. What do you understand by the term biogeography? इससे पहले biogeography पढ़ा है आप लोगों ने?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So biogeography is the study of the geographic distribution of plants, animals, and other life forms. So when we are considering the geographic distribution, what is major here? The environmental conditions, the geographical space, and the geological time. So we are just studying how the plants, animals, or other life forms are sustaining in different environmental conditions which are due to different geographical spaces. So obviously on Earth there is a variation in the geographical features. So at some places there are plains, while at the other places there are mountains, and then we have seas, oceans, and everything. And this is again changing the climatic conditions. So because of the varying altitudes, due to the gradations of latitudes and altitudes, the temperature conditions are changing. Now, according to these varying conditions, different biogeographical zones में different organisms होते हैं. So that is the study of biogeography. So we are studying the distribution of biological species upon the geographical features. So it is concerned not only with habitat patterns, but also with the factors which are responsible for variations in distribution. So ऐसा नहीं है कि एक इंडिविजुअल इसी हैबिटेट में मिलेगा, ऐसा नहीं है, but it is also taking into account the factors which are responsible for this variation. Okay. So there will be differences in flora and fauna if we see geographical zones. So it is actually the distribution of patterns of plants and animal forms or other life forms. And these distribution patterns can also change due to anthropogenic activities. So can you name any factor which can affect the distribution of plants and animals or any other life form in these geographical zones?
Deforestation.
Yes, deforestation. It is a major. So it will actually lead to habitat fragmentation, habitat degradation. So there will be species may jump habitats, or they may get extinct. So it will affect. And again, building up from deforestation, so there can also be climate change. And if we talk about climate change, then again it will affect the geographical features. ज़्यादा global warming होगा, so polar ice caps will melt. So whatever vegetation or whatever plants and animals are thriving in those area, that will be affected. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So now coming to the biogeographic zones of India. So India represents the 7th largest country in the world, and it has a large geographical area. So it is around 3.28 million square kilometer. And in India, we have a range of geographical features. We have several plains, we have several water bodies, we have deserts. So it is again showing a variation in the geography, variation in the topography. So there is latitudinal variation and there is altitudinal variation. So because of this variation, we will have different kind of plant and animals which are thriving in our country. And due to both latitudinal and topographical variation, we will exhibit a variety of climatic conditions. So there will be a difference in the rainfall pattern. There is a difference between the rainfall pattern if we see across the country. What is the major rainfall, what are the major monsoons which are driving the rainfall? So we have southwest monsoons which are originating in the Arabian Sea as well as the Bay of Bengal, which is actually catering to the water requirement. So it is the source of rain. So India has a lot of biological diversity, which is basically because of latitudinal and altitudinal variation, which is also bringing about a great variety of climates across the country. So coming to the biogeographic zones in India, we majorly have 10, and we have 27 biotic provinces. So these 27 biotic provinces are distributed among these 10 biogeographic zones. So in the next slide, we will study about these. So we have majorly 10. So 10 made the first one we have, this is the Trans-Himalayan zone. Then we have, is it visible? This picture is visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. So we have Trans-Himalayan zone, then we have Himalayan zone, then we have the desert zone. Clear? Then we have this semi-arid, then this Western Ghats, Deccan Plateau, the Gangetic Plain, the Northeast, and we also have the islands. And we also have coasts. So this is the entire coast. So we have the coastal areas also. These are the 10 biogeographic zones of India. Now we will discuss about each of these geographic zones. What are the biotic provinces in each of the zone, and what are the plants and animals which are sustaining, and also we will discuss about the climatic conditions, the rainfall patterns. So all these things we will discuss in detail. Now coming to the first zone, which is the Trans-Himalayan zone. Let me show you the picture first. So this picture is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Clear? So coming to the Trans-Himalayan zone, so we have 1A, 1B, 1C and 1D. So this is the Trans-Himalayan zone. So we have 1A as the Ladakh Mountains. So this is the first biotic province here. So if you come to biotic provinces in the Trans-Himalayan zone, so we have three major biotic provinces. We have the Ladakh Mountains, the Tibetan Plateau, and the Sikkim Plateau. Now, the Ladakh Mountains are here. Then we have the Tibetan Plateau here, and the Sikkim Plateau is lying over here. Clear? Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
So what can you tell about the climatic conditions in this area, in these areas, which are trans-Himalayan? अगर कभी जूनियर क्लासेस में पढ़ा हो या किसी को याद हो. What can you say about the rainfall in these areas? Just remember these are the zones.
सबसे
मैम स्नोफॉल होगा ना.
रेनफॉल होती है.
हाँ.
स्नोफॉल होगी, रेनफॉल नहीं होगी इसकी.
Okay, whatever the precipitation pattern I'm asking. Obviously, these are colder regions, I understand. What would be the precipitation pattern? You can see these zones are known as Trans-Himalaya. So that means the Himalayan mountains would be blocking up the moisture-laden winds, would be blocking up the monsoon. So what will happen? There will be
Very less.
There will be less precipitation. So these would be arid regions, so which will form on the mountain. So we have two sides, leeward side and the windward side. So windward side is which is receiving the wind, and the leeward side is which is not receiving these monsoon laden winds. So this area will have arid regions. Okay. So what will happen? The annual precipitations, which may be either snow or rainfall, it would be less. It would be less than 350 meters. Now, when the rainfall is less, then what do you expect would be the vegetation? Vegetation would be less. Okay. And mostly we have alpine vegetation over here, which can survive in high altitudes and high temperature conditions, and also the dry conditions. So these are high altitude cold deserts. Okay. And what about, so we have discussed about the vegetation. Now coming to the fauna of this zone. So animal species majorly include the sheep and the goat species. You have wild yak, and then you have four-horned antelope. You have snow leopard, Tibetan wolf. So all these animal species are sustaining in this area, the Trans-Himalayan zone. So you can see here the fauna. This was with the first zone. Understood? So you just have to logically remember each of the zone. Okay.
Yes.
Now coming to the Himalayan zone. So what would be in the Himalayan zone? Obviously, okay. So this region. And what would be the biotic provinces over here? So Himalayan zone is divided into 4 biotic provinces. We have Northwest Himalaya, we have West Himalaya, we have Central Himalaya, and we have East Himalaya. You can see Northwest Himalaya in this picture.
Yes.
So this is the Northwest Himalaya. Here we have the West Himalaya. Then here it is the Central Himalaya towards the eastern side, and then the northeastern side is the Eastern Himalaya. So this is how the Himalaya is spread in our country in 4 biotic provinces: the Northwest Himalaya, the Western Himalaya, we have here the Central Himalaya, and this is the Eastern Himalaya. And what do you think would be the patterns of vegetation? Would they be same in all the biotic provinces of Himalaya? Vegetation pattern?
No, ma'am.
No. Why no? Because of the variation in the topographical features, variation in the altitude. Okay. So we know the entire length of the Himalayas is around 2400 kilometers, and it is spreading across nations. So it is spreading across Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, China, Bhutan, and Myanmar. And if we see in India, then this is spreading across the states of Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, West Bengal, and Arunachal Pradesh. So Himalayas are accounting for 6.41% of India's total geographic area. And what are the annual mean temperatures in the Himalaya? It is ranging from sub-zero, that is minus temperatures, to normal room temperature, that is 25°C. And also the annual precipitation ranges. So it is ranging from 1500 millimeter in the west to more than 4800 millimeter in the east. Can you notice the variation in the rainfall pattern from west to east? It is again all dependent upon the topography. So which side of Himalaya will have more biodiversity, the western side or the eastern side?
Eastern side.
Ma'am,
Okay.
eastern side.
Yes, eastern side, because it is receiving more rainfall. Okay.
Yes.
So Himalayas exclusively exhibit longest altitudinal gradient of Earth. So obviously it will have a variety of ecosystems. जब इतना altitude का variation है, तो obviously there will be a variation in the ecosystem. So there will be variety of ecosystems which will be present in the Himalayan region. Since we will have variety of ecosystems, so we will have a variety of plants and animals which are making up these ecosystems. So now coming to less than 1000 meter elevations in the eastern Himalaya. So eastern Himalaya वहाँ है जहाँ पे rainfall भी ज़्यादा है, तो obviously it would be tropical rainforest. So it will have the vegetation of tropical rainforest and species rich tropical and subtropical broadleaf wet forest. So you have to remember that जहाँ पे elevation कम है और rainfall ज़्यादा है, so you have the vegetation of tropical rainforest over there. So now when the elevation is increasing, obviously we will have the dry forest. So we will have forests of Shorea robusta, Dalbergia, Terminalia, Acacia. So all these are present at 2000 meter elevation. Now when the elevation is increased more, then obviously we will have the conifer forest. So pine and oak trees, because these trees are adapted to survive at cold conditions. So obviously if the elevation will increase, then the temperature will also increase, and we have the conifer forest. So now if the elevation will increase more, then we will have moist temperate coniferous forest and moist temperate broadleaf forest. So at elevations more than 4500, we will have alpine vegetation, alpine scrubs, क्योंकि वहां पे टेम्परेचर बहुत ज्यादा होगा. So only alpine vegetation will be able to survive, and beyond 5000 meter there is snow and ice present even through the summers. Now coming to the animal varieties, so here we have Tibetan ass, we have Sikkim stag, Himalayan musk deer, sambar. So all these are the animals which are present. So this is the Shorea robusta, the leaves of this tree. This is the leaf of Dalbergia. So with this, we have completed the Himalayan region also. So I'll give you a 5 minutes break, 4 or 5 minutes break, so we can start the next class at 3 o'clock. Okay?
Ma'am, we have to join the next class.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, you will have to join the next class. So I
Okay,
have
ma'am.
not made it continuous.
Yes.
Okay. So wait, I will download the attendance. Okay.
मैम जो असाइनमेंट आपने हमें दिया है मैम उसमें मैम 6 क्वेश्चन करने हैं 4 करने हैं
6 questions